Hello, and welcome to a video I have no idea what we're going to do about.
So, Jan.
Yes.
We started this whole thing that's been pretty fun to do.
Oh, what is it?
I did it with Table Knots.
Oh.
Where we debated the idea of culling your collection.
Oh, no, are we debating? No, don't debate me. What?
I did it with Board Game Co.
Oh, God.
Where we talked about never backing a Kickstarter ever again.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Then we followed up with one here on our channel where Board Game Co. and I dived into some topic I can't remember.
Okay, that's very helpful.
Solid, great introduction there.
Yeah, excellent.
Jan, pick a side.
Which? Of what?
Pick a side.
Of what?
Board games should be more expensive, or board games are too expensive?
What? Why would you make me okay. They should be less expensive.
They should be less expensive.
Yes, sir.
So you're saying that board games are too expensive?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, at least we're seeing a consistent trend of increasing costs. So,
I mean, I'm going to take the hard stance that they're underpriced right now and genuinely should be way more expensive than they currently are.
Well, that's the ticket, isn't it? I'm not saying that the current board game sphere or market should be cheaper. Okay. I'm saying that board games should be cheaper. Also to produce, also manufacture. Here's what I feel.
Oh, you're blending this out too. You're like, oh, the poor publishers. We should all help them. We should. No, yeah. We should produce things even cheaper than 10 cents over in China.
Well, it depends on their bottom line. Here's what I'm saying.
I mean, some real groups of people are going to suffer for your advocacy on this.
Wait.
I feel like I just won the argument flat out.
No. So here's the thing. I have recently been starting to play retail Euros.
Okay.
And it has been an incredible contrast as to how much game you can fit into a box that has variability, that has depth of play, that has consistent and wonderful art assets, everything, at a really good price point.
Wow.
It has.
Here's my argument.
But wait, I haven't even started yet.
Those advanced mechanics, depth of play, strategic integration, the amount that you can fit into a tiny box means that tiny box is underpriced.
Well, okay, so here's the thing. In this type of conversation, it's difficult to understand the recompense that is given to designers and publishers, right? Because in my mind, and what is more, what's the word, is more apparent for a lot of consumers, it is always going to be the components, the elements within the box, the unnecessary fluff that can sometimes be in extravagant or luxurious packages. And that is where I feel that the industry has been headed for a long time, and I've actually talked about this before.
Okay.
I completely agree with you that if the bottom line for publishers and designers is too low currently, then we should keep prices as is by lowering or eliminating fluff. And I think that could be a great medley. However, I don't know or don't think that is currently how things are being processed.
But that's also not the stance you took. You said board games should be cheaper.
Well, because we're having extreme circumstances where a base pledge or a base game is over $200.
But think about how much you're getting in a $200 box.
Exactly.
I mean, here's the thing.
No one needs that much game.
Listen. First off,
period.
A lot of people want that much game. A lot of people want the piles of miniatures and the extra tokens and the metal coins. They want to be able to experience the mouthfeel themselves.
We all believe we need those things.
A crucial part of the gaming experience. I mean, are you denying that miniatures and components and upgraded elements provide some degree of value to an already great game?
No, of course not. But those things should not be in the base thing.
The tactical experience you can exude. Well, here's the problem. If they're not in the base thing, and you sell tons of this underpriced, cheaper version of your game, then the odds for you to continue to make games as a manufacturer, the reason why piles of miniatures are included is because they drive up a price in a way that the consumer feels is fair, and the publisher is actually able to make their money on what they actually produced. They didn't produce a lot of miniatures. They didn't produce a lot of components and tokens and items. That justifies the price to the consumer. But the reality is, the reason why board games should be worth more, should be sold at higher prices, is because the amount of time and energy and skill and dedication that goes into just the crafting of a quality game experience is so high that the product we're purchasing for $60 on the same night that we're sitting down to play it and ordering $30 or $40 worth of pizza and $20 or $30 worth of drinks to consume alongside of it is mind-blowing, the disconnect that we have. I'll order 3 Papa John's pizzas, a full soda, and have a glass of bourbon, with 3 friends on an evening and complain about the fact that the game we're playing was $50 at the local store new.
Well, here's the thing.
It should be way more expensive.
Here's the thing. I feel that the more expensive that we make games, and the more we make it, the more inaccessible. And I come from the side, like I come from a community where if a game is over $50, it is not a priority. And I understand the complete argument that board gaming is a luxury hobby, like most hobbies anywhere. Completely understand that. But
Ferraris aren't accessible to me.
correct. Yeah. But cars are. Right?
Barely.
Well, a car can be.
I have a lot of board games, Jan.
So when we start making board games that much more expensive, we start alienating groups of people that can access those games. And to me, the most important thing about board games...
Are you arguing that what like Awakened Realms or CMON has done with the industry has negatively impacted those that benefit from those used copies or those extra copies or the way that our industry has grown?
I wouldn't even talk about used.
I'll argue that the reason why cars are accessible to me now is because things like Ferrari back in the day pushed the limits of what cars could be in a way that slowly disseminated down to people who didn't have hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend. Do the same thing with the board game space. Let's make them more expensive. Let's incentivize innovation and creativity and sell it to the people that have the money to justify it, and then watch other games be created. Kingdom Death probably, arguably, did that for our industry in a lot of ways. Now, some don't like all the big box miniature games that have come out about tactically just stripping off pieces, but you could buy one for $60 now in a way that you couldn't have done 10 years ago.
That's where I disagree with you. I think that historically we have seen very traditional trends in cost for games that have actually allowed for a lot of people to purchase them and get them and feel comfortable with that price point. And specifically Euros being the main thing that I would always reference when talking about a bang for your buck deal.
But there is already a ton of things like print and plays, accessible games. Like you could get a game at your local store for a couple dollars. You could borrow. There's game libraries. I don't know that I buy your idea that board games should be made less expensive to appeal to the common, like, lowest denominator. I understand that we want games to be accessible to those people. I'm 100% on board with that. But I can't support the idea that our industry as a whole should be made cheaper or devalued, because the work that the publisher did, the work that the designer, the illustrators, the manufacturers put in, all of that, I think, right now is underpriced in our market.
Yeah, but if we're having that conversation about our market, we it's pertinent to every single creative industry in the world.
Sure, we're not involved in every creative industry in the world.
But there's a difference.
Are you admitting then that every creative industry has this issue? Because then you're conceding the argument to me.
Well, I don't know if I'm conceding it to you, because there's a difference between reality and the ideal scenario where everybody gets paid the same, and then there's also consumers and what they're willing to pay. You know, the market, what people are actually willing to put into something. So if there's an expectation across the board of what something should be, people are not going to be comfortable going over that.
Which is where miniatures start to play, which is where upgraded components start to play. We know from the back end, they don't add that much cost to a thing. We as a collective community, the audience that we have here, should start shifting our perception of what a game is worth away from the idea that it needs miniatures and piles of components and extra things. It should just be kind of like Splotter does in a lot of ways. Why are Splotter's games considered overpriced? Well, it's because the market standard is lower than what Splotter charges for their titles. But would either of us argue that Bus or Food Chain Magnet, when you actually get to play it, isn't worth what we just spent on it?
Yeah.
For an experience, you would argue that it isn't worth what we just spent?
No, that yes.
Yeah,
yes,
I mean, the experience that we had on the table, the craftsmanship and the stamp of approval they put on their titles means that whatever they're charging, I can sort of trust that they charged right. And I would still, in the context of this argument, argue that they're probably lower priced than they should be as well.
So I can 100% agree with that.
Okay.
The one area that I think is important that we make a caveat on, where I think there needs to be balance, is that there needs to always exist.
You've never seen the show.
There needs to always exist a clear line between games that are, I'm not going to say mass market, but games that are accessible, and also having, I think these two things can coexist happily. Having the exuberant Kickstarters with the excessive components, and also still allowing and accepting the normal standard of cost.
I'm perfectly I'm fully, willing to allow any publisher to do what they want. I'm saying perceptionally and realistically, everything in our market right now is underpriced.
Well, it's going to be
from the card pack that you're buying at Walmart all the way up to a high-end KDM style game. I mean, Core Box KDM ships at a loss for the publisher. Everything is underpriced.
Well, I'm not sure how we can get the retail market to eventually meet that cost. Like, video games have been debating or trying to do this for...
I was wondering if this would come in, and if you hadn't brought it up, it was going to be something that I was going to tie in.
Yeah.
The video game marketplace, the $60 price tag that I know you throw your hamstrings against.
Yeah.
You are unwilling
Yes.
to pay anything higher,
Yes.
God forbid the same price, for a title that, I mean... There's no denying that right now the amount of time and crunch that's put into products
It's totally ridiculous.
is way above anything that's ever been expected in the industry. And what you're asking for out of a game is way above anything else. So in our space, the board game space, we're suffering from the same thing that the video game space is. Prices haven't shifted. Consumer willingness to spend on a luxury hobby hasn't shifted. And it even breaks down to genres. Like, I'm more willing to spend something on a big box miniature game than I am on a social deduction game, because I have, for reference, a $5 pack of cockroach poker I could pick up at a thrift shop, and that'll give me most of the experience I want.
Yep.
I think it's all underpriced, and I think we as consumers and we as community members need to not only recognize that, but begin shifting our consumer habits in a way that invest in titles we really appreciate and enjoy, but I'll give us more flexibility and more money to invest in games and invest in this hobby that we care about, because it can't be sustainable if we are strangling smaller publishers in an attempt to reach every single person possible.
At the end of the day, it's going to have to be a very, not necessarily conversation, but experiment to determine where that fine line is for both sides. Because ultimately, it hasn't been solved yet, and I'm not sure if we're going to be able to solve it either.
So,
do I have to concede?
You should concede. I'll keep hammering you until you do.
Well, no, I don't want you to hammer me at all. Okay, well, you're hammering me with your eyes right now.
The end of these videos comes down to really a conversation. Were there any points on my side of the argument that you felt or expected me to bring up that I didn't? The video game was one that you hadn't touched base on until at the very end, and I really thought that needed to come into the conversation.
Oh, of course, because here's the thing with that, and I'll say why I didn't bring it into the conversation before. Video games have mass. They do ridiculous amounts of people and access to those games, which makes that $60 price point and then the lessening value of that
to 20 million people
much easier versus board games, which is a very niche hobby.
You're trying to get 3K people to back it on Kickstarter.
But also board games are similar to, speaking of video games, Nintendo titles, where they don't actually devalue, right? Yeah. So it's a very different conversation. So
for me, the crux was the idea of complaining about the price of a game while sitting down and eating a pizza next to it, and that pizza being the same price that you're grumbling about having paid.
Well, the interesting thing is that I probably wouldn't get the expensive pizza in the first place because I'm keeping everything in mind. I'm very stingy. I can be stingy.
I know, but you and I have both certainly ordered Thai food, ordered pizza, sat down with a game, and been like, this game was not worth the price, while eating something or drinking something or spending time with our friends. And they're the same. And the game's still here and still worth money and still playable. And the pizzas and drinks are gone. The concept of value and the concept of what is worth what is insane to me. If I play, if I take a game like Cockroach Poker and I spent $3 every time I played it, that game would be worth, after a couple years, hundreds of dollars to me.
Sure.
Because it's that good, and I'd probably chuck the cash in every time I wanted to sit down, because that experience is always that good.
All I know, if my base copies for games started being around $80 per pop, I probably would very heavily consider being in this hobby at all, because it is the sticker shock of that.
Sure.
Just coming from, because we're people, we're humans.
Is that sticker shock based off of real articulated value? Or for me, the argument is more the consumer mindset and where we are as a nation?
Yes, of course. It is a consumer mindset. Yeah. So going against that grain so immediately, so aggressively, would probably mean the death of our hobby, right? As so far as we know it,
Maybe
because we're going
But
so
I
against the
also-
grain so quickly.
I just also don't know that I don't know that it's sustainable.
Well, it's been sustainable for over 40 years,
Maybe,
even more.
maybe.
Technically, well, we know of large.
And it could just be mass market. It
But
could
here's
just
the
be
thing.
expanding the space.
Here's the thing. That's why I was saying that having relevance and spaces is critical for the hobby to subsist. Because the cool thing that Kickstarter has brought is that it's created a safe haven for small publishers to not have to worry about the limitations and the strangling. But both of those things can exist separately.
Yeah.
The entire crux of what I was trying to convey in my argument is that I don't want bleeding in from that Kickstarter into the retail space. I don't need in my retail space where I get most of my games come from retail, really. I don't need the golden tokens. I don't need the metal pieces. I don't need the extreme. Sure, I get it, but I don't need those things in my base copy because I want these games to be. I want to gift this to my friends. Sure. I want my friends to see this in a shop and associate it with things that they know, they understand, and say that is value, and that is where my concern exists. That's why I believe wholeheartedly that things can continue being separate.
The other argument that I was expecting for you to pull in
that
you didn't pull in for against like the idea that games should be cheaper is the sense of value when I do the pizza comparison is obvious.
Yes.
Like, pizza's consumable, gone in a night, game continues to be replayed. The game should be worth more.
Yeah.
But then you compare it in the other direction. Other things in our society that are devalued. TV shows, which provide an immense amount of technology. The Oculus Rift. All these things that for $400, for the price of 3 board games or one, CMON title.
Well, I didn't mention it because it would be contrary to my argument.
No.
Well, here's the thing.
It could be.
Trade value.
Sure, it could be contrary to your argument, but there's an element there where my comparison against value on a lower end made board games seem shockingly worthwhile. But on a higher end, well, 3 board games or 1 Kingdom Death is an Oculus freaking Rift.
Yep.
Mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And then you start going, well, yeah, everything's devalued, so board games can't compete if they try to say that they should be priced closer to what an Oculus Rift is.
Yeah, but going against that topic is Oculus Rift in a year loses $200 in its final price. Sure. A board game in 3 years loses $5 to $10, depending on how much you use it and how much you took care of it. Yeah. You can make that is the reason why I started being in board games in the first place, because it allowed me to make back my money.
Yeah. You can invest in a hobby that you got enjoyment from without really. I mean, neither of us have had a lot of liquid. It's nice to know that I can resell and not be out thousands.
Exactly. So that's why I didn't want to bring that up. Yeah. Because it felt like I would be shooting myself in my own foot.
I mean, I definitely would have argued against it. But I thought that comparison would have been interesting nonetheless, because I definitely brought in the pizza one. And it is fair-ish. It's fair-ish. It's not quite, but it's interesting. Whatever the case, let us know how you're liking this series of Jesse traveling across the country.
And where you stand.
Debating people. And let us know down below. So Board Game Co. and I are legitimately getting a spinning wheel.
Of topics.
And so if you have some suggestions or topics, leave them down below. We'll add them to the spinning wheel, and we'll spend some time doing
breaking
some coverage.
That down.
Yeah. Whatever the case, whatever you do, remember to do the important thing. Spend more on board games.
And don't argue with Jesse.
We'll see you next time. Thank you.